We're embedded with the Somali Special Forces unit known as Danab. These are U.S.-trained commandos who have just received intel about 2 target houses that are supposedly hiding al-Shabaab militants. We're heading to the village right now to see if we can arrest these guys.
These Danab fighters are Somalia's best weapon against the terrorist group al-Shabaab. They're rolling out on one of their first operations since their American partners left the country in January. It's the only time journalists have been allowed to film a raid. One house they checked was empty, so they moved on to the next. But it wasn't a bomb, it was just a box of tangled up wires. After detaining a half-dozen men, it was clear that none of them were in al-Shabaab.
Because nothing was found in either of the 2 target houses, would you consider that bad intelligence that Danab received? The doors that you kicked down to these homes, will Danab be responsible for replacing those doors? How long do you think the war with al-Shabaab will last?
That's a rosy view of what lies ahead in Somalia's war on terror, considering that up until the US left, there was no end in sight. The US spent hundreds of millions on training, equipment, and aerial support for Danab. The US military says Danab now conducts more than half of counterterrorism operations and has made it more difficult for al-Shabaab to operate. But in December, President Trump made a bid to get out of, quote, endless wars and ordered US troops out of Somalia. Only they didn't go home. They went to bases in Kenya and Djibouti, leaving Danab with less than half of the 3,000 commandos originally promised. Did you expect that the Americans were going to leave so soon? In what ways is the US continuing to support you here, even though they're not physically here?
How do
you feel now that al-Shabaab sees this as an opportunity to maybe hurt Danab?
nimankaas idinka difaacayeen isma lihin waxaan aaminsannahay anaga inaan isku filannahay howlgal keligeen aan qabsan karno meel walba aan tegi karno ayay joogaan difaacan karno meesha aan anaga aan degannahay.
Over the past 14 years, al-Shabaab's campaign of violence has killed thousands throughout the Horn of Africa, including US soldiers on one military base that just became home to many of the troops who just left the country. They now control nearly a quarter of Somalia and are funneling the money they make through extortion to al-Qaeda. Having the US in Somalia helped al-Shabaab recruit. The group outnumbers Danab around 6-1.
We're here in an undisclosed location in Mogadishu, and we're about to meet up with a guy who says he was a former al-Shabaab intelligence officer, and we're hoping to find out how al-Shabaab received the news that U.S. troops have withdrawn from the country.
Vice News couldn't confirm this man's former rank in the group, but we do know he is still in communication with its members.
Now that the Americans have withdrawn their troops from Somalia, how has al-Shabaab responded to that news?
qofka bini'aadamka waxyaabo ku dabeecad uu leeyahay jirto qofka uu ka cabsanaya markuu ka tago oo iska dhacsiina inuu guulaysto maxaa yeelay sayaan waxaa waaye qofka ugu weyn oo membarka ugu dambeeya oo la dagaalamaya inay Ameerikaan yihiin haddii ay Ameerikaanka guulaystaan inay wada guulaysteen haddii lagu guuldareystaan ay guuldareysteen laakiin isma dhaxayaan haddii Ameerikaan oo dagaalka joojiyay nimankaas jaanisyo badan dadka inay ku sii xasuuqaan inay u suurtagelinayso.
Are the Americans right in thinking that al-Shabaab wants to attack America outside of Somalia?
taasna waxaa habeen imaamo u soo jeedaan jaanis allaala jaanis u suurtagal haddii Kenya tahay haddii Ethiopia tahay haddii Djibouti tahay meesha allaala haddii xamar dhexdeeda soo ambo waxaa la mid Soomaaliya dhexdeeda ay tahay meel allaala meesha dana Maraykan lagu waxyeelay karo habeen imaamo u soo jeedaan oo inay waxaa la iska dhiciyaan waxaa yeelay dagaalka waa la iskula jiraa.
What does al-Shabaab think about Danab? They see them as a formidable force to be reckoned with now that the U.S. is gone?
waxyaaba looga cabsanayana badanaa waxay ahayn diyaaradaha kor socday ahayn hubkooda ama fitrigooda ma ahayn marka awooddaas ay u cabsi jireen danab haddii awoodii diyaaradihii iyo waxaa dagaaladii lala qaadayay meesha ay ka baxaan iyagoo Soomaaliya lala dagaalamo wax ma dhaamaan sida waxaa badanaan ay ka cararaan waa guuxa diyaarad.
Militants aren't the only ones afraid of U.S. planes overhead. One watchdog group estimates that U.S. bombings targeting al-Shabaab might have killed as many as 143 civilians. The U.S. military only admits to 5, including one member of the Kuso Omar family. Today, Kuso Omar is 9 years old. She lived in al-Shabaab territory until last April. Do you remember what it sounded like? I'm so sorry, Ade. I'm so sorry. Do you know who did this to you and your family? Do you know who was flying the plane? So, Ade, who do you blame for what happened to your sister?
There's a very deliberate intelligence process to confirm the target.
Major General Dagvin Anderson is in charge of all U.S. Special Forces operations in Africa.
Because of the repositioning and not having those boots on the ground, is there a fear that the intelligence that we have won't be as sharp when we're making these decisions, to launch a drone strike?
So the standard for any strike remains the same. If we don't have the quality intelligence, we're not going to take the strike.
President Biden now requires the White House to sign off on all airstrikes in Somalia, but he said nothing to signal what comes next for troops on the ground.
If Biden decided to reverse the decision and send troops back into Somalia, how difficult would that be?
We haven't done that assessment. Is it possible? Of course it's possible. My job is to make sure that there are options available for our decision makers, for our policy makers to have.
Was there ever a need to be in Somalia to begin with?
I would say yes, it's important that the international community be engaged in Somalia. Al-Shabaab's a threat to the international community, it's a threat to the United States. It is, just to be clear, it is part of Al-Qaeda. And Al-Qaeda has already proven the will and the ability to attack the West and the United States.
Al-Shabaab sees the U.S. repositioning out of Somalia as a victory. Does this not mean that in some way the U.S. has failed in its mission?
I don't agree with that at all. We're still engaged. So while we may not be there persistently, we still have a periodic engagement. When Al-Shabaab's claiming victory, they're probably doing it a bit premature because they still have to go up against the Danab. And they may be small in numbers, but they're quite capable. Just because it's propaganda doesn't mean it's the truth. And of course, that's what Al-Shabaab is going to put out.
The statement from AFRICOM last year said that they were hoping to support Danab until 2027 and build up the force upwards of 3,000 commandos. Less than half of that number have been trained. So is there a feeling that we have left them in the lurch?
So I don't believe we've left them in the lurch. We've given them high quality training. They're very capable. Counterterrorism is difficult. There is no two ways about it. It is not without risk. And the threat that our partners, the Danab, face is real. But ultimately, this is a Somali problem. And this is an issue that the Somali people and the Danab are going to have to face.
naga ma joojinayso waayo horaan u sii soconaynaa waxaa ognahay in la wada dhimanayo shaqadan lagu jiray ciidanka laakiin waxaa ka muhiimsan targetka aan leenahay waa in al-shabaab waddankan laga saaro dadka anaga naga dambeeyaan ay ku noolaadaan nolol fiican oo high.
Do you even want the Americans to come back?
soo wada laabto waa la shaqeynayna awalba waa la shaqeynayna Maraykanka taas oo naga weyn waaye dowladdeena iyo taalamidaas
la gaara in kale lama oga adoon gaarin haddii ay wax walba dhici karo wax walba imaan kara marka haddii ay gaari waayeen kulay ayaga xaggooda way anaga ma aha.
What was the reasoning behind the positioning to begin with?
So that was a decision that was made at the senior levels of government. So I can't really speak to what decision. We executed the decision. I was not part of the discussions that went into that decision.
Did they give you a reason why you needed to find a way to reposition the troops?
This was part of the global reposturing effort. There were several efforts that went on when we repositioned in Iraq and Afghanistan. So it was combined with that overall effort.
What do you think we've lost by not having troops on the ground in Somalia anymore?
I think that when you say, what have we lost that day-to-day close relationship and touch point, but it doesn't mean that the relationship is lost. It just means we have to work harder for it and that we have to stay engaged and we have to be deliberate about how we engage.
AFRICOM has verified and confirmed that civilians have been killed because of U.S. drone strikes. We were able to meet with a young 10-year-old girl who was part of a family that was hit by one of the drone strikes. Her sister is still suffering complications from that attack, and she still has surgeries that she needs to go through. Shouldn't her family be compensated for the suffering that they've had to endure?
First of all, yeah, it is heartbreaking. It is. Anytime you're in a war zone, anytime there is civilian casualties due to conflict, it's heartbreaking and it's very frustrating. It's frustrating as a commander and as a father. When we do these strikes, there's a very deliberate intelligence process to confirm the target. And what I can say to that is we can't claim perfection, but we do hold ourselves accountable. And we do that very deliberately. And we do that with a very methodical process so that we do improve and we do hold ourselves to a high standard. I think we do that better than any other nation. And I know for a fact we do it better than any terrorist organization. And that Al-Shabaab is unaccountable for the thousands of civilian casualties that they've inflicted, well over 4,000 since 2010.
But for Aday's family, when the U.S. makes a grave mistake like that and they confirm it and they admit it, you know, does that family see any compensation?
And that's a policy decision, and that's something I would recommend you take up with higher level policymakers and Department of State for that level of decision.